Hey guys, tonight we are quietly tiptoeing into the grimy, drafty world of medieval assassination, where stealth is relative, planning is questionable, and honestly, most of it sounds like a group project gone wrong. You've got a dubious dagger, damp boots, and a name no one can pronounce. It's all very low-budget espionage. Picture a world lit by sputtering torches where messages are hidden in bread loaves and secret meetings take place behind pig stalls. You probably won't survive this, but you might get a free cloak. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not supposed to be here. You were supposed to be hauling sacks of grain or watching goats chew grass in slow motion. But one night at the tavern, with the wind whistling under the door and the fire refusing to commit to a proper blaze, you made the mistake of saying yes when someone asked if you were interested in a little work. A short job. Quiet. Pays in silver, no questions asked. Which is exactly the kind of job that leads to questions, and possibly the kind of job that ends with someone asking you to explain why your tunic smells like smoke and treason. The recruiter wasn't even that mysterious. No hood, no cryptic riddles. Just a man named Ulrich, with a crooked belt and a suspiciously well-fed cat. He slid a crust of bread your way. It was stale, possibly from last harvest, but free bread is free bread. The price, as it turns out, was your signature, more of a thumbprint, really, on a goatskin scroll that was mostly smudges and one very unsettling drawing of a knife. Training, if you can call it that, happened in a barn behind the blacksmiths. You were taught two essential things: how to walk quietly, fail, and how to hide in shadows, double fail. No one mentioned what to do if someone turned around and saw you, or what to wear if it rained, or what to say if your target turned out to be the mayor's second cousin, and everyone in town suddenly knows your name and your mother's opinion on stewed onions. Historians still argue whether medieval assassins were formally trained professionals, or just unlucky people handed a knife and a vague address. You're currently leaning toward the second category. It's not glamorous. You don't get a secret code name. No one gives you a leather satchel with lockpicks and poisoned darts. Instead, you get a note scribbled on the back of an old sermon, a time, a place, and a warning. Don't be late, or early, or wrong. Your first real mission begins before sunrise. The village smells like wood smoke and wet wool. You're supposed to meet your contact near the tanner's shop, which, fun fact, is the worst-smelling building in town, possibly the worst-smelling building in the continent. The plan is to exchange a signal. What signal? No one told you. So you stand there, blinking into the mist, holding a loaf of bread like it's a weapon, and wondering if you're the bait. Eventually, a woman walks past and mutters, "The sheep are restless." You say, "They usually are." She gives you a look. Maybe that was the signal. Maybe now you're both disqualified. Either way, you're given a short briefing, just enough to make you anxious. Your target is a merchant, possibly a noble, possibly just someone who owes Ulrich money. The line between target and accounting error is very blurry. You're told he lives on the north edge of town, near the chapel, in a house with blue shutters. Except, of course, every house has blue shutters, because blue pigment was on sale, because the monk who sells paint made a batch too large and refuses to let it go to waste. You head back to your shared room, a loft above the cooper's shop, and examine your gear. You have one knife. It's more of a spoon with ambitions. You have one cloak, patched with fabric from at least 3 different eras. You have shoes, technically, but the left one whistles when you walk. You try to sleep, but the straw mattress keeps poking your spine. And someone downstairs is playing a lute like it owes them money. When dawn arrives, it's with a grey drizzle and the smell of something burning, possibly your nerves. Breakfast is a chunk of hard cheese and regret. You wrap it in a cloth and tuck it into your belt, just in case this mission takes more than an hour and you need something to chew while hiding in a bush. Outside, the cobblestones are slick. You walk with exaggerated nonchalance, which somehow makes you look like a mime having a crisis. A dog barks. A window creaks. A chicken stares at you with unnerving judgment. By the time you reach the north edge of town, your feet are soaked, your knife is slipping from its sheath, and you've forgotten whether you're supposed to knock or just blend in. Blending in, it turns out, is difficult when your hood keeps falling into your eyes and your cloak smells like last week's fish stew. Still, you crouch near the chapel, pretending to study a mossy wall. You are the wall now. You are one with the lichen. You are a small bump in the historical landscape. And then the merchant walks past. Or someone who might be the merchant. Or maybe just a man with a very confident mustache. He doesn't look particularly evil. He just looks like someone who owns more spoons than you, which is enough to make him suspicious. You don't act yet, you wait. Because maybe this is a test, or a trap, or a Tuesday. So you linger, half frozen, stomach rumbling, waiting for the moment when everything makes sense. That story passed like an old dream, fading with the wind. But stir not from the hearth, for another tale steps softly in. We journey into the oddly unglamorous life of a medieval assassin. Specifically, all the long, slow, kind of disappointing hours between actual assassinations. Picture it: cold stone floors underfoot, a drafty cloak that smells vaguely like garlic and regret, and a to-do list that includes mending your own socks, because yes, even killers need warm feet. You wake up in a cramped rented attic above a cooper's shop. There's hay in your hair again. Classic. The air smells like boiled onions and medieval disappointment. You stretch under your threadbare blanket, already hearing the clatter of hooves and wooden wheels outside. The market's stirring. But you've got your own priorities. It's gear maintenance day. Being a contract killer in the 13th century isn't all rooftop lurking and dramatic dagger throws. In fact, it's mostly laundry. You start with your cloak, black, obviously, though it's now faded to a shade historians affectionately call wet crow. There's a tear at the hem. You patch it using a bone needle and some waxed linen thread, which you sharpen between your teeth like a bad habit. Next up, your boots. One's got a pebble trapped in the sole, the other smells like yesterday's turnip stew. You scrape off the mud, realign the heel leather, and mutter a few choice words about the cobbler who swore this pair would outlive kingdoms. Kingdoms, maybe. Cobblestones, not so much. You check your dagger, the one with the bone hilt you stole off that corrupt magistrate in Bruges. There's dried sap on the blade. Sap, not blood. Turns out it doubles as a fruit knife during dry spells. You hone it against a flack river stone, watching the edge glint in the morning light like it has opinions. Your pouch inventory is next. Dried cherries, 2. Copper coins, 5. Sticky. A folded bit of parchment with instructions in the worst handwriting you've ever seen, and one broken chicken feather you keep for reasons you're not emotionally prepared to unpack. Your neighbors think you're a traveling candle seller. You let them. It's not glamorous, but at least it explains why you sometimes return home smelling like tallow and regret. Besides, the lie gives you cover to carry around bundles wrapped in wax paper. Bonus, you've gotten oddly good at making real candles. Lumpy? Yes. Flammable? Technically. But they pass. The truth is, most assassins live like grumpy monks with better aim. You avoid attention. You keep your rent paid on time. You say hello to the baker's wife and resist the urge to critique her knife technique. You water your one sad basil plant in the window because it's green and alive and doesn't ask questions. Historians still argue whether most medieval assassins were lone wolves or semi-organized guild members with secret handshakes and retirement plans. The evidence is patchy. Some claim assassin orders trained in abbeys disguised as monasteries. Others say most were just desperate freelancers with a flair for stealth and bad knees. Your knees, by the way, are killing you. Too much crouching behind barrels. You massage them with goose fat, and whisper vague threats to the cobblestones of this accursed town. A friend of a friend once claimed boiled moss helped joint pain. But you tried it once and just ended up itchy and angry. Sometimes you catch yourself muttering the day's schedule aloud, like some tired noble's scribe. Sharpen, stretch, blend in, breathe. Maybe fetch bread. Definitely avoid that one alley near the tannery. It smells like despair, and there's always a guy there trying to sell you cursed dice. And you'd think being an assassin means unlimited cool outfits, but no. You own 3 tunics, all charcoal grey. One has elbow patches sewn on from your old underpants. The fashion police are not a concern. Blending in is. So you wash them in a bucket, hang them near the chimney, and pray no one notices the knife slit in the back of one sleeve. At midday, you sit at your rickety desk and copy out a few phrases in cipher. Practice makes perfect. And anyway, it's calming. Like Sudoku for people who sometimes have to flee across rooftops. The cipher today involves translating weather reports into code, a technique favored by spies, mail runners, and overly dramatic monks with nothing better to do.
For lunch, it's hard bread, harder cheese, and half a roasted onion you stole from a merchant stall yesterday. You eat slowly, chewing like it's a moral decision. The onion wins. Once a week you polish the coins in your stash, not for any financial reason, but because there's something soothing about tiny circles of bronze gleaming under candlelight. You don't trust banks, because they don't exist yet. You don't trust holes in the floorboards either. Thanks to that one time a rat made off with 2 whole florins in your backup map. Speaking of maps, you keep one hand-drawn sketch tucked inside a leather wallet stitched into your belt. It's not to scale, and it's missing half the streets, but it's yours. Marked in faint red ink are all the good hiding spots, bad corners, and bakeries that give free samples if you compliment the owner's apron. As the sun dips lower, you light a taper, slide a wooden bolt across your door, and start inspecting your spare gear. The backup dagger is bent. The throwing needle set you bought in Milan is still unused, because you can't quite figure out how to aim them without looking like a confused juggler. One of the cloaks in your trunk smells faintly like old books and betrayal, but it's fine. You'll figure it out. You hum an old lullaby while you work, not for comfort exactly, but because it keeps your hands steady. Your mother used to sing it while sewing. You still remember the words even though they make no sense. Something about a lark, a shoe, and a castle full of eggs. By the time dusk slides into the cobbled alleys like a lazy cat, you're already dressed to blend in. Not in black, never in black, that's stage play nonsense. You're wearing muddy brown, the kind that looks like it used to be something else but gave up. You step into the twilight as just another tired traveler, a face nobody bothers to memorize. The streets are alive with clatter, carts rolling over stones, someone haggling over onions like their wedding dowries, a dog barking at absolutely nothing. Perfect cover. You head to your favorite tavern, not because it's cozy, it's not, or welcoming, definitely not, but because it has 3 exits and the barkeep is too nearsighted to notice you only order broth and listen. You settle into the back corner, your back to the wall, hood low. From here you eavesdrop. An elderly merchant is complaining about thieves. A pair of traveling minstrels are arguing over who gets the top harmony. A young knight is bragging about a duel that, judging by the limp he's hiding, didn't go quite as well as he claims. You sip your broth, which tastes faintly of salted shoe, and wait. This is how you gather intel, not from grand spy networks or dramatic handoffs in shadowy alleys, but from sloppy drunks and talkative stable hands. You once learned the exact layout of a nobleman's estate because his valet got tipsy and ranted about the location of the chamber pots. Historians still argue whether taverns served more as places of gossip or unofficial town halls. Based on your experience, the answer is yes. There's a reason you know which inns bake better meat pies and which ones occasionally host visiting poisoners who claim they're herbalists. Tonight the chatter's especially rich.
A man in a red tunic mentions a suspicious shipment arriving by boat. You file that away. Two servants whisper about a noblewoman's sudden illness, possibly natural, probably not. You make a mental note never to eat her stew. Once you tried striking up a conversation yourself, it went poorly. Apparently casually asking someone about local castle guard rotations is not normal small talk. Since then you've perfected the art of the silent nod. Mysterious, slightly unsettling, great for encouraging others to fill the silence. There's a small troupe of traveling players in town this week, which means a sudden spike in dramatic reenactments of legends that never happened and jokes that were probably stolen from monks. You attend their performance, but only because it's an excellent excuse to stand in a crowd unnoticed. You laugh at all the wrong moments just to blend in. Afterward, a man bumps into you and mutters something cryptic. The owl lands at dusk. You respond, and the weasel forgets his boots. It's nonsense. But now he thinks you're someone else, and that someone owes him 5 silver coins. You walk away quickly. Back at the tavern, a bard sings a mournful ballad about a love affair between a kitchen maid and a turnip farmer. You're not sure if it's satire. The room is wrapped. You use the distraction to slip a listening pebble, basically a small clay bead, hollowed out with a sliver of lead, under the table where 2 mercenaries are loudly debating bridge tolls. You retrieve it later, clean it with vinegar, and discover they were just really into bridges. Assassins, it turns out, are often disappointed by how boring most of the world's secrets are. Still, this is how you build a mental map of alliances, grudges, drinking habits, and weak points. Everyone has a routine, even barons, even bishops, especially bishops. You once shadowed one who walked exactly 13 steps to the right every time he left the pulpit just to feel balanced. You're not saying you used it against him, but you're also not saying you didn't. You play a game with yourself on nights like this. Spot the spy. That man hunched over his wine, just a baker, but the woman by the hearth spinning yarn while subtly watching everyone who enters. Definitely someone else. Maybe even one of your own. You raise your cup to her and she nods. A silent acknowledgement. Yes, we're both pretending to be people we're not. Quieter moments come too. You sometimes find yourself watching the flicker of the hearth for too long, caught in memories. Not regrets exactly, but questions. Like, how many names have you forgotten? How many people remember you as a shadow in a crowd? Fringe historians like to imagine assassins always working alone, always lurking. But some documents suggest groups, tiny cells of killers who passed notes via pies and trained doves to deliver warning messages. One chronicler insisted an assassin once hid a knife in a roast goose. No one knows if that's true, but you've looked at poultry suspiciously ever since. You do some of your best thinking here, under the hum of conversation, the creak of mugs raised, and the smell of spilled ale soaked into centuries-old floorboards. You make lists. Not of targets, of possibilities. Who's newly arrived in town? Which families are rising? Who's complaining the loudest about taxes? Occasionally, you doodle on the tavern tables. Harmless spirals, the symbol for don't trust the innkeeper. A small rat in a hat because you once saw one and never recovered from the joy. One time, another assassin left you a coded message in the foam of your broth. You nearly missed it. That was also the time you realized some people are too clever for their own good. And your cloak now has a very faint leak stain from the ensuing sprint. Your evening ends when the mood in the tavern shifts from lively to dangerous. That moment when laughter turns to growling and someone starts smashing cups just to hear them break. You slip out before the brawl begins, unseen. Just another tired candle seller heading home. Outside, the moonlight slicks the cobbles like silver paint. Your boots crunch over gravel. You pause once to adjust the strap of your hidden pouch, and again to pack your basil plant, which you've left on the windowsill for airing. It's still alive. Miraculous. Inside, you light a single taper. The quiet wraps around you like wool. You remove your cloak, place your dagger carefully on the table, and sink into your chair. Not exhausted, not even particularly tense, just full of names, voices, half hints, and the smell of cheap stew you didn't order, but somehow still acquired. And that truly is the job. Listening, blending, waiting. There are no awards, no dramatic music, just broth, boots, and bedtime paranoia.
The morning drizzles itself into existence, slow and indifferent, like a bored scribe, adding another smudge to the margins of a half-finished scroll. You wake up not to birdsong, this is a medieval town after all, but to the unmistakable groan of a wheelbarrow and the rhythmic cluck of a chicken having an existential crisis outside your window. You stretch, joints creaking like old timber. Your basil plant has somehow tilted itself dramatically to one side, as if mimicking your posture. It's a mood. Today, you don't have a target. That doesn't mean you don't have work. People assume assassins spend every day sharpening blades, leaping over rooftops, and muttering ominous riddles into the wind. But most days, you're managing logistics. You clean your gear, not for the drama, but because dried rust is a betrayal waiting to happen. You inventory your herbs, belladonna, monkshood, that weird grey mushroom with a name that translates loosely to nope. You restock charcoal for messages, beeswax for sealing letters, and at least one spool of thread in case a disguise requires impromptu embroidery. And of course, there's maintenance. Your best dagger has a loose hilt again. You fix it with a bit of boiled leather and a prayer to Saint Agatha, patron saint of minor inconveniences, or so you claim. Your boots have walked more miles than most nobles ever ride. You re-oil them, silently thanking whatever tanner made these sturdy enough to withstand not only forest paths, but also questionable puddles behind the apothecary. A mainstream historical fact. Fine, medieval assassins rarely acted independently. Many belonged to secretive guilds, religious sects, or political factions. One famous group, the Nizari Ismailis, yes, those ones, maintained mountain fortresses and rigorous training regimes. You don't have a fortress. You have a loft that smells vaguely of old cabbage, but same spirit. You spend part of your morning writing coded reports. Your cipher is simple but clever. Certain letters replaced with animal icons. The recipient will learn that the fox slips past the bear, which in assassin speak means Baron Wensley is very distractible and leaves windows open. Vital information, really. You then visit the market. Not for killing things, for onions. You walk slow, blending into the shuffle of townsfolk. The fishmonger is arguing with a monk about divine price limits. A child runs past carrying something that was definitely not paid for. You pass the spice merchant, who claims his cinnamon came all the way from Ceylon. You suspect it came from a very tired cart one village over, but you nod anyway. It's all part of the illusion. You stop at the cloth store, not for yourself, though you do need a new tunic that doesn't smell like stew and regret, but to listen. Cloth sellers are surprisingly chatty. Today's topic? A local widow with suspiciously well-fed cats. You jot that down. You've seen poisoners use cat food deliveries as cover. Or maybe she just likes chubby cats. Either way, noted. Now comes training. No dramatic backflips. Your greatest skill isn't speed, it's stillness. You retreat to the forest edge, where the moss muffles your steps, and birds consider you part of the background noise. You practice walking without sound, not quietly, without sound. You breathe with the wind, test pressure on every footfall, and curse once, softly, when a twig betrays you. You pick it up and snap it for good measure. You work on throwing accuracy. Not knives, too loud, too risky, but small stones, coins, walnuts, anything that might need to be tossed as a distraction or a signal. Your record is hitting a beetroot balanced on a log from 20 paces. You don't brag about it. Much. A fringe tidbit from history? In some medieval assassin training manuals, yes, those exist, kind of. There are suggestions to walk with pebbles in your shoes to build pain tolerance, or to sleep on wooden boards. You tried the board thing once. Your back rebelled and declared independence. Later, you sit and sketch. Not art. Maps. People. Daily movements. The baker's apprentice always leaves the shop at noon. The town clerk sneaks off behind the chapel at dusk. You don't judge. You just observe. Observation is your true weapon.
Historians still argue whether assassins kept personal diaries. Some claim to have found fragments, coded thoughts, philosophical musings, entries like, "Must clean cloak, smells like goat." Others believe those were written by bored monks pretending to be assassins. You see both sides. Afternoons are for quiet preparation. You prepare a decoy letter, then boil parchment scraps to create aged messages, in case you ever need to fake correspondence. You rehearse aliases. Today, your brother Elric, an itinerant candle maker with a limp and an oddly specific fondness for pears. You practice your story until it's smoother than your dagger blade. You check your traps, not for animals, but for messages. You've rigged several town spots with simple indicators: a feather tied to a branch, a shell facing west, a coin flipped heads up. Today, there's a ribbon on the post by the well. Message received, no words, just a change in routine. You nod. Back at home, you boil water for tea, mint and something slightly medicinal. Not because it tastes good, but because it clears your head. You sip, watching the steam curl like secrets escaping. You end your day the way you often do, practicing stillness. Sitting so long the candle burns halfway down, not sleeping, not quite thinking, just being unnoticed. This, oddly enough, is the most important part of the work, letting yourself disappear even from yourself, letting the world hum on without your interference. No blood, no blades, no final words. Just tea, shadows, and the soft rustle of your basil plant adjusting to the fading light. Evening slips in like a rumor, soft, half-whispered, and full of implications. The candlelight flickers against your stone walls, reflecting faintly off the blade you haven't used in 3 weeks. It's not always about action. More often, it's about anticipation. And right now, your job isn't killing. It's planning not to get killed. You pack a travel satchel just in case: dry bread, an apple, a pinch of salt in waxed paper. A wax seal kit, 3 coins of uncertain origin, and a tiny folding mirror that has saved your life exactly once by showing you a guard sneaking up behind you. You still nod at it like an old friend. Tonight's task? Surveillance. You've been told someone might be watching you, a fellow operator, or worse, an amateur with a grudge and no idea what they're getting into. You leave the house in layers, physically and metaphorically, blending with dusk. You become the kind of person nobody wants to remember. Average height, neutral gait, non-committal cloak. If invisibility were a fashion statement, you'd be its reluctant runway model. You loiter near the town's eastern gate, pretending to wait for someone you'll claim didn't show. Behind you, a dog sniffs a cabbage cart, with more interest than anyone gives you. Perfect. Mainstream historical fact time. Not all assassins worked alone. Many operated in tandem with informants, innkeepers, herbalists, even stage performers. The key was plausible denial. If someone could pass you a vial of sleeping draught under the guise of pouring ale, that was a successful collaboration. And it made for much more interesting dinner theater. You eventually spot him, tall, cloaked, standing just a bit too still near the apothecary. Rookie mistake. You don't approach, you just note. Maybe he's watching you. Maybe he's watching the cat who lives on the awning above the bakery. You log it anyway. On the way back, you check in with the washerwoman, who definitely isn't a washerwoman. The real name is Berta, and her water buckets are occasionally filled with coded messages, not linens. Today, she gives you a wink and tells you the mayor's wife has been buying an odd amount of powdered almonds. You mentally file that under maybe nothing, maybe poison. Almonds walk a fine line. And now,
one of your rare visits to the guild house. Not every assassin belongs to one, but you like infrastructure. Plus, the tea there is excellent. The guild house isn't a Gothic stone tower. It's a bakery. A real bakery, mind you. They do actually sell pastries, but it's also the nerve center for quiet work. The cinnamon rolls fund espionage. The lemon tarts have probably passed more intelligence than the entire town council. It's always the lemon tarts.
You meet with Master Elwyn, who insists you call him that, even though he once got caught in a chimney and had to be extracted by a confused gooseherder. He informs you that a new noble has arrived, loud and clumsy, and surrounded by guards who clearly got their training from interpretive dancers rather than soldiers. You nod. A potential client, a future mark. Who knows? For now, he's just noise. A quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval spies trained to use coded embroidery, messages stitched in seemingly random threadwork on tunics and sleeves. The colors, knots, and spacing carried meaning only to those trained to read it. You once met a seamstress who could tell you a duke's entire travel itinerary just by looking at his cuffs. Remarkable woman, dreadfully allergic to bees. You take the long way home, walking canal side. The moon glints on the water, where a barge creaks by carrying barrels and maybe secrets. You pass a monk sitting on a bench, murmuring something that might be a prayer, might be an insult. You nod respectfully. You don't want to find out which. At home, you do what few imagine assassins doing: laundry. The tunic from 2 nights ago still smells faintly of smoked fish. You scrub it with lye soap, hang it near the fire, and promise yourself that next time, you'll wear something with fewer buttons. You sharpen your pen, more often than your blade these days. You make notes in your own shorthand, faces, patterns, hunches. You diagram an escape route through the town granary based on a dream you had where you were chased by a knight made of turnips. Not likely to happen, but you never know. Historians still argue whether medieval assassins ever suffered from something like burnout. Certainly records show agents disappearing for long stretches, only to reappear with new names, new jobs, and in one case, a llama. Was that a cover, or just a very committed life pivot? You feel it sometimes. Fatigue. Not from danger, but from vigilance. From being the person who has to notice everything. From never being off duty. From eating porridge 6 days a week, because it's the only thing that doesn't give you away. You keep a coin in your boot, not because it's useful, but because it reminds you you're real, still here, still watching. Later, lying in bed, technically a mattress stuffed with straw and regret, you listen. The town is quiet now, save for the occasional cough, a creaking shutter, a nightjar. You think about the man near the apothecary. Was he watching you? Or was he just someone like you, waiting for something that may never happen? You turn over, dagger under the pillow, coin in the boot beside the bed, and basil plant swaying softly on the windowsill like it knows a secret and isn't telling. You wake to the sound of bells, slow, solemn, and slightly out of tune. Someone's died, or gotten married, or the goat mare has escaped again. In this town, bells mean almost everything, and almost nothing. You sit up, carefully, taking a moment to scan the room. Still intact, no messages pinned to the door, no unfamiliar shadows, no basil leaves out of place. You live by routine, and this morning that routine includes not getting stabbed. It's a planning day, no missions, no spying, no cryptic ribbon codes tied to the fence post. That means something even more dangerous: thinking. You gather your notes, a few scraps of waxed parchment, and an egg that's clearly seen better days. You scramble it over a tiny flame while sketching out your week. There's a feast coming up, an excellent opportunity to either gather intel or get poisoned by poorly washed radishes. You also have a visit scheduled with the candle maker, who you suspect is involved in something shadier than wax. The man has 12 customers and 27 candle orders a week. Suspicious. Mainstream historical fact break. Feasts in the medieval period weren't just food and pageantry. They were intelligence gold mines. Nobles drank too much, guards got distracted, and staff had to run around behind the scenes. Assassins and spies could blend in with servants or minstrels. And nothing brings out gossip
like meat pies and bad wine. You plan disguises, a one-eyed pilgrim with a limp? Done that. A laundry boy with a nervous cough? Too memorable. Maybe you'll go as yourself, just a slightly duller version. The trick is to seem harmless, like a stool or a spoon. Everyone needs one, no one remembers which. Later, you make your way to the edge of town where the woods begin. A soft rain is falling, coating every leaf in glistening green. You crouch beside a half-buried stump and retrieve the tin hidden beneath. Inside, a message from a distant city sent via 2 pigeons, 3 donkeys, and 1 highly confused monk. It reads, "Do nothing. Yet." That's it. You smile. Doing nothing is an art. You practice disappearing again, this time by pretending to be a woodcutter, resting mid-chop. You lean on an axe, borrowed, not stolen, wear your oldest cloak, and hum a tuneless melody. Within minutes you become invisible. A passing merchant doesn't even glance at you. Victory. Quirky historical tidbit time. Some records suggest certain assassins trained in mimicking birdsong, not to charm the fauna, but to communicate across distances without alerting others. You've tried. Your nightingale sounds like it's choking on a breadcrumb. You stick to coughing in patterns, more your speed.
You return to town near sundown. A street performer is juggling flaming sticks and singing a questionable ballad about a duke and the wheel of cheese. Children cheer, old women shake their heads, and a dog performs a stealth theft of a pastry. You observe the crowd, not the performer. You watch who's watching and who isn't. Observation is your pastime and your weapon. You pass the stables, where stable hands hum songs older than the walls. Horses snort, hoofs stamp, and 1 donkey gives you the same look you gave the bishop's bodyguard last week. Deeply suspicious, possibly psychic. Back home, your ceiling leaks. Again. You place the usual bucket underneath and settle into your chair with your thinking cloak on. Basically the same as your normal cloak, but with fewer crumbs in the pockets. Historians still argue whether assassins lived alone or in pairs. Some claim partnerships were common, 1 to watch, 1 to act. Others believe most operated solo to avoid betrayal. You've worked with others before. One ran off to join a traveling theater troupe. Another married a cheese merchant and opened a tavern. You think about writing letters. You don't. You light a candle, slice an apple with extreme precision, and dip stale bread into a suspiciously brown stew. A relaxing meal, if you pretend it came from anywhere but your pantry. Then a knock, soft, rhythmic. Friendly, if knocking can be friendly. You wait. Another knock. The pattern says not urgent, which could mean anything from help me move a body to do you have nutmeg. You open the door to a young courier, barefoot, damp, carrying a small sealed envelope. You nod, accept it, offer him a boiled sweet, and close the door. The envelope contains nothing but a pressed flower, a violet. No note, no markings. You stare at it, then place it in your book of quiet things, between a sketch of a tower and a poem you don't remember writing. This is your life. Not sword fights or dramatic last words shouted from rooftops. This, the messages no one else notices. The flowers, the leaks, the egg that might have been off. You sit back, listening to the quiet stretch of evening. Your basil plant leans toward the candle. You think it approves. It's time now. You close the shutters, bolt the door, slip your shoes off, and just before sleep, you whisper the only rule that ever really mattered. Be still, be kind, be gone. The candle is low now, its flame no longer reaching for the ceiling, just swaying gently like a tired thought. The town has settled into a hush, stone walls holding warmth, rooftops exhaling steam, alleys softened by night's embrace. You rest, legs stretched out, cloak folded under your head like a makeshift pillow. The basil sways again in a breeze you don't feel, and for once, you think about nothing in particular. Out there, someone's sweeping up after a feast. A baker is dreaming of rye loaves. A dog is curled against the church steps, ears twitching with half-forgotten sounds. And you, once the shadow, the watcher, the quiet step between words. You're just a shape in the dark now. You've earned the stillness. You've earned the quiet. Let the worries drift. Let the unfinished letters stay unread. The coins can wait. The candle will burn itself out. Right now, your breath is steady, your thoughts soft-edged, and the world, for all its clamor, feels like a blanket drawn snugly over your shoulders. Maybe tomorrow will bring messages and motions and mystery, but tonight, there's nothing more to do. Close your eyes. Let the hush carry you. The basil will keep watch. The tale sleeps now, as do the men who lived it. But across the moor, a lantern burns for yet another. We are traveling back to the dim corridors and drafty chambers of Renaissance Europe, where the cloak and dagger business didn't always involve actual cloaks or daggers. Instead, sometimes it came down to something much simpler. A single, clumsy Latin error, a misplaced vowel, the wrong case ending. And before you know it, congratulations, you've just outed yourself as a spy. You're not exactly the James Bond of your time. You're more of a third-string copyist who got roped into espionage because you have neat penmanship and know enough Latin to fake it. Sometimes. Your cover story is that you're a traveling legal assistant, but really you're carrying encrypted letters in the false bottom of a goatskin satchel, and you're praying nobody asks you to recite the ablative absolute aloud. Your candle's been burning low for an hour. You squint at the parchment, trying to copy out the next passage without smudging ink on your fingers again. You've already blotted 3 lines. The wax is pooling too quickly. Outside, you can hear horses clattering past, couriers maybe, or merchants, or someone else like you. You've been sitting here for hours, forging correspondence between 2 noble houses that aren't actually corresponding at all. But if they were, the letters would probably look something like this. You think. It's hard to know when your reference grammar has a wormhole in the cover and is technically about 150 years out of date. The plan is simple. Fake tension between these 2 families, send the letters through the right hands, let the gossip catch like hay fire, and then sit back while the alliance breaks apart. You're not expected to fight, just stir. But Latin is trickier than swordplay. One false accusative, one mangled subjunctive, and suddenly your carefully fabricated drama reads more like a love poem to someone's uncle. You don't even realize the mistake until 2 days later, when your handler sends back your latest batch with a note written in clean, scathing, minuscule. Is she supposed to be married to the ox? You try to tell yourself this is fine. You're still learning. But the truth is, most spies in your position never got formal training. The Renaissance world had no MI6. At best, you might get a few scribbled instructions on lemon juice ink and polite bribery, and then you're off, hoping no one notices that your Latin doesn't quite match your shoes. And people notice. A cardinal's secretary raised an eyebrow at your use of nunc last week. A merchant's wife asked why your phrasing sounded so scholastic, like a dusty priest trying to flirt. You smiled awkwardly and pretended it was deliberate. It was not. Still, you have your tricks. You've learned how to smudge just enough to hide your wobbliest grammar. You add a few wine stains for authenticity. You once tied a fake letter to a pigeon's leg and released it in the wrong direction on purpose, just to throw off suspicion. The pigeon returned 2 days later and pecked your window angrily. You fed it a grape and sent it off again. Historians still argue whether the average Renaissance spy understood their own codes half the time. There are letters preserved in archives that remain only partially decoded, mostly because no one, not even the people who wrote them, could agree on which substitution system they were using. One Venetian letter begins in cipher, then switches into badly spelled Latin halfway through, before trailing off into an inventory of cheese. You tell yourself, at least you haven't done that. Your worst moment so far was in Florence, where you presented yourself as an envoy with a diplomatic inquiry, only to mispronounce diplomaticus in a way that sounded suspiciously like houseplant. The guards were polite, but you were escorted out by a man with very large shoulders and no visible humor. Tonight, the ink flows slowly, and your fingers are cramped. You reach for your wine, a local red, thin but not awful, and take a small sip. You wish you could add poison tester to your resume, but honestly, you'd probably spell it wrong on the parchment. There's a draft in the wall. Your candle flickers, and you instinctively shield the flame, even though you're alone. Or at least, you think you're alone. That's the other thing. Paranoia is the spy's bread. You don't trust your neighbor. You don't trust the stable boy. You definitely don't trust the baker, whose eyes linger too long and who, frankly, has no business speaking 5 languages if he only sells rye. You set your pen down and stretch. Your back pops. You stare at the half-finished forgery and consider starting over. Then you remember that ink is expensive, your wrist hurts, and you haven't been paid in 3 weeks. So instead, you carefully roll the parchment, tuck it into the hollowed-out leg of your travel stool, and hope no one sits down too suddenly. Out the window, the moon is climbing, wan and steady. A dog barks in the distance. The stars are beginning to blur. Somewhere out there, another spy is probably making the same mistakes as you. Maybe worse. Maybe their entire fake dispatch reads like a grocery list written by Cicero after 2 ales. You hope so. Misery loves grammatical company. You wake to the sound of bells. Not church bells, mind you, but the clatter of an apprentice bell ringer, testing his rhythm a little too early. Or maybe it's a warning. You can't tell. You've slept in your tunic again, and your shoulders sore from using your satchel as a pillow. At least it still contains your ink pot, 2 coded letters, and 1 very stale cheese roll that now smells like regret. Breakfast as a Renaissance spy is rarely luxurious. Sometimes it's wine and bread. Other times it's just bread and hope. Today you gnaw on the edge of the cheese and pretend it's part of your training in mental toughness. Someone, somewhere, is probably eating fresh figs by a marble fountain. But that someone didn't forge a letter implicating a Milanese merchant in a fake shipping scandal. So here you are. What do spies do between spy stuff? Well, mostly you wait. And while you wait, you blend in, which sounds glamorous until you realize blending in often means pretending to be deeply fascinated by grain prices, fishmongers, or the fact that your neighbor owns 37 spoons and won't stop talking about them. You shuffle to the town square with a packet of documents tucked under your cloak. They're fake, of course, but stamped with a convincing wax seal that you pressed with the underside of a bronze button. You've memorized your fake name, your fake family's coat of arms, and the fabricated dispute you're supposedly mediating. But your boots are real, and they hurt. Today you're attending a guild hearing, because your target is known to frequent them. Something about regional trade rights and imported dye. You sit on a bench next to a butcher who smells like boiled hooves, and try to look like a curious bureaucrat. Occasionally you nod and scribble in your little leather notebook. You don't know what you're writing. It might be poetry, or soup ingredients, One fact historians love to highlight is that many Renaissance spies held perfectly ordinary jobs. They were diplomats, scholars, merchants, even wandering musicians. The spycraft came second, like a side hustle with higher stakes and worse job security. Your cover job as a scribe for regional arbitration is perhaps the most boring imaginable, which makes it perfect. No one wants to interrogate someone whose main job is writing down the number of crates at the port. And yet, it's easy to forget you're in danger. The city looks so beautiful this time of year. Vines creeping up warm plaster walls, laundry flapping in the breeze, a dog chasing pigeons under a carved fountain. You pause to soak it in. You hum a few bars of a tune you barely remember. Then your target walks by. You spot him by the distinctive tilt of his hat, absurdly tall, like he's hiding a secret compartment up there. You follow at a polite distance, notebook in hand, pretending to count bricks. He ducks into a small shop.
You step inside and are immediately hit with the scent of wax and vinegar. The shopkeeper greets you, but you wave her off with an apologetic grunt and pretend to study the quills. Your target is at the back, speaking in hushed tones with someone you don't recognize. An older man with an aquiline nose and a habit of checking the window every 5 seconds. You don't catch much of the conversation. Something about shipping routes. Something about Pisa. You fake an intense interest in a bottle of rosewater ink and purchase it, mostly to avoid suspicion. The shopkeeper wraps it in cloth and hands it over with a look that says, "You're either a lover or a spy, and I can't tell which." Outside, you note the direction your target walks, east toward the canal. You decide not to follow. Too risky. Besides, you have your own business, waiting for the right courier to hand off your message. It's disguised as a pamphlet on theological reforms, with the coded message tucked in the margin notes. You've even underlined the wrong words just for fun. If decoded correctly, the message reads, "Storm on the 6th, prepare bread." That's not a metaphor. There will literally be a staged bread shortage to trigger unrest. Politics in the Renaissance, more carbs, fewer ethics. Historians still argue whether such tactics, provoking shortages to stir political sentiment, were genuinely effective or mostly symbolic gestures. What is clear is that spies like you were often the ones writing the notices, distributing the flyers, and then pretending to be shocked when riots broke out. You sigh. You'll probably have to fake shock again next week. It's exhausting work. Your next meeting is in a bathhouse. A bit cliché but convenient. Steam and murmured voices provide the perfect cover for whispered secrets. You enter with your tunic slightly damp. You spilled your wine earlier, but now it's intentional. And slide onto a bench beside your contact. A woman in a gold-trimmed robe who smells like lavender and sarcasm. She doesn't greet you. Instead, she passes you a small scroll inside a hollowed-out cucumber. That's not a metaphor either. She's eccentric. You tuck it away and casually complain about the water temperature. A nearby nobleman nods solemnly and launches into a detailed rant about heating stones. You feign interest again. You leave the bathhouse with damp fingers, a head full of steam, and 3 new leads. One about a Flemish ambassador, one about an intercepted letter, and one about a donkey that may or may not be symbolic. Your evenings are quieter. You return to your room above the apothecary, who is probably also a spy based on the number of cough remedies he stores in hollow scrolls. And you sit by the fire, rereading the day's notes. One word jumps out at you. Servisia. Beer. Or possibly the name of a code phrase. You wish it were just beer. You sleep in shifts, always half-dressed, always with one ear open for footsteps on the stairs. You dream in Latin. Sometimes you wake up conjugating verbs aloud. And still, no one has caught you. Yet, you spend the next morning watching pigeons. Not because you've given up on espionage, but because your handler swears by them. "Observe the birds," he said. "They'll tell you everything you need to know." You're still not sure whether he meant it metaphorically or literally, but either way, it's brought you here, to a pigeon loft on the roof of a guild hall,
wearing borrowed boots 2 sizes too large and pretending to care about wing angles. Below you the city hums. Carters shout at donkeys, a lute player mangles the same 3 notes in a loop, and somewhere a baker's apprentice drops a tray and curses softly. Up here, you breathe in warm feathers, cold clay tiles, and the slightly alarming aroma of pigeon droppings baking in the sun. One of the birds, a particularly smug-looking grey fellow with an ankle tag, has just returned from Venice, or maybe Siena. You're not great at directions. Regardless, it's carrying a small roll of parchment beneath one wing. You coax it gently with some crushed millet and extract the message. A tightly curled scroll in what you hope is your contact's handwriting, but which could also be a very articulate tailor's. Inside, the message is brief. Meeting postponed. Too many eyes. Use the green hat if safe. You have no green hat. But you do have a green ribbon, which you hastily sew into the lining of your usual cap. Renaissance spycraft. 10% deception, 20% improvisation, 70% sewing. Downstairs, you step into the bustle of the early market. It's loud, vibrant, and smells mostly of citrus and fish. You blend into the crowd, pretending to haggle over a length of wool, while your eyes scan faces. It's not paranoia, it's survival. You know at least 2 of the fish vendors are paid informants. You just can't remember which 2. Historians still argue whether the webs of informants in Renaissance cities were as extensive as records suggest, or whether it was mostly fear-driven guesswork that made everyone suspect their neighbor. But there are enough surviving letters to show how even the mildest market conversation could be twisted into intelligence. You finish your performance as a picky wool buyer and stroll into the side alley behind the dye guild. It's shaded and cool, and the stone walls amplify the smallest footsteps. You pause beside a barrel of indigo and wait. After several long minutes, a man appears. He's got ink on his fingers, a feather in his cap, and a nervous twitch in his left eye. He introduces himself as a collector of scrolls. You both know that's code, but it's polite to pretend. He hands you a folded document. You don't open it immediately. That would be rude. You ask about his scroll-collecting business. He tells you a rambling tale involving monk.
Once alone, you open the document. It's a ledger of wine shipments, seemingly innocuous. But every third entry is underlined, and when you read just those lines, they form a message, a list of names. Familiar names. People you've met, people you've lied to. One of them is yours. You sit very still. The ink feels like it's burned into your fingers. How did it happen? Did someone notice the wrong case ending in your fake tax bill? Did a courier double-cross you? Or, worse, did you drop your forged wax seal somewhere? You go back to your rented room and check your satchel. The seal's still there, nestled beside your smuggled cucumber scroll. But something feels off. You check the floorboards. One is slightly out of place. Not much, but enough. They've been here. Not to arrest you, yet. Just to show they could. You swallow hard and throw yourself into normalcy. You spend the next 2 days doing nothing remotely spy-like. You attend a poetry reading, which is so dull it should be classified as a weapon. You volunteer to help a monk copy hymns, even though your Latin is still suspicious. You buy some very conspicuous oranges and juggle them badly in the square, just to look harmless. During this time, your actual job continues. More letters to forge. More seals to mimic. You're working on a new style. Something subtle, with a curved tail on the capital P to indicate its code. It's slow work. You sharpen your quill 3 times before giving up and gnawing the end into a point with your teeth. There's no dignity in espionage.
only splinters. You attend another bathhouse meeting, this time disguised as a traveling herbalist. You've borrowed a basket of dried sage and pretend it's medicinal. Your contact passes you a note hidden inside a hollowed-out walnut. You're not even surprised anymore. Renaissance spies had an obsession with edible espionage. There are stories, possibly exaggerated, of coded gingerbread, encrypted sausages, and a particularly chaotic incident involving poisoned marzipan. You exit the bathhouse and duck into a side chapel to read the note. It's in your code, and it takes you 3 tries to decode it correctly because your own symbols keep changing. Eventually you get the message, a new assignment, this time involving a courier from Naples and something called the Green Swan. You don't know what that is. It could be a tavern, a person, a particularly confusing metaphor. All you know is that you're supposed to meet them at dusk, near the old theater ruins. You pass the day restlessly, watching shadows stretch across rooftops. When the sun finally sinks low, you make your way to the meeting point. The ruins are overgrown, half swallowed by ivy. A cat slips. The person in green approaches with the elegance of someone who absolutely does not want to be seen. You recognize the style. Soft steps, shoulder turned, face half shadowed by the hood. It's spy theater, just a bit dramatic. But then again, this is Italy during the Renaissance. Subtlety and flair coexist in bizarre harmony, like a dagger wrapped in velvet. You don't speak right away. That would be rude. Instead, you bow slightly, as if greeting a mildly interesting noble at a feast. They nod in return, and produce a slender scroll sealed with beeswax and pressed with the emblem of a tulip. A real tulip, pressed into wax. You're now dealing with someone who uses flowers as official signatures. You pocket the scroll and gesture toward a bench that's technically part of the ruins, but still sturdy enough to sit on without fear of splinters or ghosts. Your contact declines the seat and instead asks if you've ever heard of a man named Girolamo Franti. You haven't, or maybe you have, but under one of his 12 aliases. They explain, quietly, urgently, that Franti is an information broker, or a traitor, or a former monk who once ran an underground mail network involving choir boys and trained ferrets. Historians still argue whether Franti ever truly existed, or whether he was a convenient ghost name used by nervous spies to pass blame. Either way, someone claiming to be Franti is in Florence, and your job is to find him, or her, or them. It's all very vague. You part ways with the Green Swan, who disappears into the ivy, like a caffeinated squirrel, and set off to investigate. You don't have a name, a face, or a location, just a list of code phrases scribbled in the margins of a forged recipe book for mushroom stew. Your first stop, a glassmaker's shop near the bridge. He's known for his talent with stained windows and his tendency to gossip. You enter with your best bored noble's secretary face and ask if he's seen any monks lately. He blinks. Tall monks? Short monks? Monks with dogs? You say, monks who smell faintly of nutmeg and secrets. That gets a raised eyebrow, a pause, and then a nod toward the tavern next door. Inside, the tavern is loud and warm, lit by candles jammed into wine bottles and the glow of roasted meat turning slowly on a spit. You order something you won't drink, a sour ale with the consistency of regret, and sit near the hearth. You listen. You pretend not to. You overhear 3 men arguing about taxes, 2 women whispering about a broken engagement, and 1 bard muttering Latin declensions under his breath. That's your lead. You wait until he's between songs, then toss him a coin and ask if he knows any verses about Franti. He doesn't flinch, just winks and begins a mournful tune about a man.
You don't ask questions.
You never ask too many questions. At Lantern Street, the apothecary greets you with a sigh. You again. You've never met him. This is a common spy problem. People recognize your fake identities, but forget they're fake. You go with it. He pulls out a small jar filled with something that looks suspiciously like powdered moths and says, "Do you want to remember your dreams or forget them?" You say, "I'm looking for the man who never dreams." That's the phrase, the code. He nods, slides open a cabinet, and produces a folded scrap of parchment. It's a map, sort of. More like a doodle of rooftops with little symbols marked in ink. A triangle here, a spiral there. One of the symbols is your own, a squiggly sun you once used as a joke to sign a fake weather permit. Which means whoever drew this knows your work, or has been watching you. You thank the apothecary. He mutters something about ghosts and goes back to grinding what might be beetles. That night you climb the rooftops in silence. The city looks different from above, less chaotic, more like a tapestry. You hop from tile to tile, following the strange map. At one point, you slip slightly and land on your knee with a muffled grunt. Somewhere below, a dog barks. Eventually, you reach a small chimney with a bundle of rags tied to the flue. Inside the rags, a message, written in mirror Latin. You squint, reverse the letters in your head, and make out the sentence. He drinks at dawn, near where the statue weeps.
The statue, of course. The weeping saint carved into the side of the old granary, a tourist attraction for overly dramatic pilgrims and bored noblewomen. You've sat near it a dozen times and never noticed anyone suspicious. But at dawn? That's a new angle. You spend the rest of the night pacing. Not walking, not sitting, pacing. The floor of your room is now a blur of footprints. Your brain won't rest. Did you slip up? Are you being tested? What if the green swan was Fronte? What if you're Fronte and just forgot? By morning, you're no closer to clarity. But you're ready. You head to the statue before the sun fully rises. The square is quiet. A cat glares at you from a barrel. The baker yawns as he sets out loaves. And then, from the shadows, a man appears. He's old, bent, wearing a cloak patched in 12 places. He doesn't say a word. He hands you a coin and walks away. On the coin, your squiggly sun.
You hold the coin in your palm like it's glowing. Your squiggly sun symbol, carved in the crude hand of someone either very unskilled or trying to look very unskilled. It's your old mark from 3 missions ago, the one you stopped using after it accidentally appeared on a church permit and sparked a brief but wildly inaccurate cult. Now it's back, on this weathered, weighty coin. You flip it in your hand and notice something else, tiny dots etched into the rim. Morse code doesn't exist yet, but human paranoia does, so naturally there's a cipher. You do the math. It spells Giove, Jupiter. A common code word, yes, but also the name of a side street near the tailor's quarter. The sort of place you wouldn't go unless someone told you to. The game is afoot again. You arrive on Giove Street just before midday. It's hot, dust swirls lazily in the sun, and a child is chasing a chicken that's clearly winning. You duck into the shade of a narrow colonnade and look around. Nothing obviously suspicious, except for a man selling onions while humming a Gregorian chant medley, which is odd. You approach him cautiously and ask, "Do you have any purple onions?" He stops humming and stares directly into your eyes. "Only on Wednesdays." Today is Friday. He hands you a bag anyway. Inside the bag, nestled between 2 real onions, is a tightly rolled vellum strip. You wait until you're back under the colonnade to read it. This one is written in rhymed couplets, because apparently someone has been spending too much time with Renaissance poets. It goes something like, "Follow the beast with the mirrored eyes, to the room where the daylight dies." Riddles. Why does it always come back to riddles? You glance around and catch sight of a parade float. It's part of a celebration, Saint Somebody's Day, and features an elaborate papier-mâché dragon. Its eyes? Polished tin mirrors, of course. You tail the float through the city as it creaks along uneven cobblestones,
Children cheer, a juggler drops a pin and swears softly, and someone throws rose petals in your face. Just another Renaissance Thursday. The float halts in front of a theater you've never noticed before. Not quite abandoned, but not thriving either. The crowd starts to thin. You take your chance. You slip around the back of the theater and find a door ajar. Inside, it smells like old velvet and secrets. Dust motes float lazily in shafts of light. You creep along the edge of the stage and duck through a curtain. Behind it, a small dressing room with a cracked mirror, a stool, and on the floor, a book. Not just any book, your book. Well, one of your books, the one you copied fake royal decrees into 2 months ago. It's marked up now, notes in the margins, corrections to your already corrected Latin. And then, a voice. You forgot your ablative. You spin around.
It's him, Franti, or the person claiming to be him. He's holding a quill and a pear, and he looks disappointingly normal, like a notary with secrets. He gestures to the book and adds, "You declined the participle in front of a bishop." You want to argue, but he's right. You did mess up the participle. And yes, it probably did reach a bishop. You groan and sit on the stool. Franti hands you the pear. It's very ripe. You talk. And as it turns out, he's not here to kill you. He's here to recruit you. Apparently, your mistakes are famous enough now to mark you as a known unknown. Someone who is flawed but functional, like a slightly cracked ceramic bowl that still holds soup. People like you, Franti says, are useful. You're unpredictable, untraceable, and terrible at Latin, which is oddly charming. You ask what happens next. He shrugs. That's up to you. Keep sending forged letters, or come with me. There's a job in Prague involving a fake coronation and an unusually intelligent goose. You stare at him, then you laugh, because of course, there's a goose. Historians still argue whether Franti ever truly led a shadow network that operated across city-states, or whether he was just the figment of 5 bored scribes and a very persuasive wine merchant. But here he is, offering you a future written in code and bad grammar. You tell him, yes, because you're tired of running solo missions, tired of wondering if your mistakes are fatal or just embarrassing, and frankly, because you've never been to Prague. Later that evening, you burn your wig and your fake merchant license. You bury your monk's robe behind the theater and toss your old wax seals into the river, watching them sink like unspoken apologies. You leave behind the city, the coin, the sun-drenched market where people argued over fish and lace, and in your bag, a new seal. Not a sun. This time, it's a goose. The city fades behind you, its rooftops gently dissolving into the dusk. Lanterns flicker to life one by one, casting amber halos over cobbled alleys and ivy-covered courtyards. The rhythm of footsteps softens, the clatter of cartwheels slows, and the voices that once filled the squares melt into quiet murmurs behind shuttered windows. You walk slower now. The weight of your bag is oddly comforting. Just a few forged documents, a nearly empty coin pouch, and that one polished goose seal. The world feels a little blurrier at the edges, like a half-finished painting viewed in candlelight. A breeze catches your cloak and carries the scent of baked figs, warm stone, and distant linden blossoms. You pause beneath a twisted olive tree, its leaves whispering a language older than any code you've ever cracked. For once there's nothing to decipher, only the slow stillness of evening. Somewhere far ahead, a new city waits. Maybe with rain-slick rooftops or freezing towers. Maybe with smarter pigeons. Maybe with fewer Latin declensions. But for now, your footsteps fade into the gravel. The road behind you disappears into velvet dark, and the night wraps you gently, like parchment tucked into a courier's coat. Let your shoulders loosen, let your breath deepen, and let the story for tonight finally rest. The stars still turn, the owls
still watch. And so, we wander now to a different tale. Hidden beneath the moss of time, we trudge through a medieval fog so thick you can barely see your own feet, let alone the target. You're cold, you're tired, and surprise, you're an archer, and not the glamorous Robin Hood kind. No, you're the kind of archer who wakes up in a field somewhere in Wales with a rock for a pillow and yesterday's onion for breakfast. The camp stirs before the sun does, dew clinging to your threadbare tunic as a wet wind slices through the hedgerows. You shift beneath your wool blanket, not that it helps, and realize your bowstring is probably damp again. That's going to make everything harder today. Not that anything is ever easy. You stretch your legs, stiff from another night on rocky ground. Your breath puffs in clouds as you shuffle toward the communal fire pit, where someone is boiling what may or may not be last week's turnip. The smell is not helping. Beside you, one of the lads is massaging his fingers like he's about to play a harp, not draw a longbow. Because the truth no one admits is this: medieval archers aren't noble warriors. They're half-frozen laborers with splinters under their nails and chilblains on their toes. The morning routine includes checking your bowstring, which, despite being lovingly greased with wax and tallow, still manages to stretch or snap at the worst possible moment. You've had to replace it 3 times this month, and each time you swore creatively in Anglo-Norman under your breath. You chew on yesterday's crusty bread, not so much eating as enduring. You had better hope you don't need steady hands today. Historians still argue whether most peasant archers were volunteers or conscripts, but in your case, it doesn't really matter. You're here now, and you're not going anywhere until the captain says so. The older guys say you get used to the wet. You suspect they're lying. The gear, though, it's almost personal. Your bow is 6 feet of yew, seasoned and scarred, just like your spine. Your arrows are hand-fletched, tipped with iron, and sometimes marked with charcoal symbols for luck. You carry them in a sheepskin quiver you patched with a bit of your old sock. It's not elegant, but it works. Somewhere nearby, the smith's apprentice is hammering out replacement tips. The sound rings out across the camp like a rhythmic groan. You glance at the sky, grey again, and wonder if it'll rain before lunch. Probably. The thing no one ever tells you is just how boring the in-between bits are. Sure, you might have one thrilling volley every few weeks, but most of the time you're just waiting for orders, for firewood, for your turn at the soup, for your life to warm up a little.
Your moment of quiet doesn't last long. A sharp whistle slices through the damp air and you sigh. Training drills. Again. Not that you're surprised. Archers, after all, are only as useful as their muscle memory, and your captain has the delightful habit of reminding you that discipline wins wars, not daydreams. You groan as you rise, knees cracking like old wood. You fall into line beside the same gang of weary-eyed archers, all of you clutching longbows that feel heavier every week. You glance down the row. Most are about your age, give or take a decade and a few missing teeth. The one thing you all have in common is a vague expression of sleep deprivation and mild trench foot. The captain, a wiry man with permanent scowl lines and suspiciously clean boots, starts barking instructions. Today's drill? Stamina shoot. It's code for keep firing until your arms fall off. You shuffle to your spot, stamp the mud off your boots, and ready your stance. Feet shoulder width apart, bow upright, fingers on the string. You draw, hold, release. The arrows thunk into targets with varying success. One guy accidentally lets go too soon and nearly nails the captain's cooking pot. The resulting silence is deafening. You all freeze. He looks at the arrow, then at you. Then he sighs and mutters something about maggots with delusions of heroism. You all pretend not to hear. As your fingers go numb for the 3rd time, you start thinking about the archers in legends, the mythic ones, the ones who fire flaming arrows while standing on horseback, hair flowing like a tapestry come to life. You, meanwhile, can barely feel your fingertips and smell like damp straw. There's a bit of excitement later, when a nobleman rides through camp. You barely catch a glimpse, but his velvet cloak flaps dramatically behind him, and his horse looks like it's made of gold. He ignores the archers, of course. You're not the kind of warrior he invites to feasts, but his visit does stir conversation. Apparently, he brought word of a skirmish 2 valleys over. Some of the lads start speculating about when they'll be deployed next. You quietly hope it's not too soon. You're not ready to kill anyone, not really. Besides, your left shoulder is still sore from yesterday's drill. As you polish your arrows later that afternoon, someone mentions the legendary archery tournaments of the past. Supposedly, there was once a village where the winner of the annual contest got a live goose, a silver spoon, and a wife, though not necessarily in that order. Historians still argue whether those contests were true skill trials or just excuses for day drinking and accidental injury. That night, the rain returns. You lie beneath your wool blanket, curled like a snail, listening to droplets patter on the canvas overhead. Everything smells faintly of wet sheep and boiled barley. You shift to get comfortable and jab your elbow on a loose stone. Again.
Someone a few feet away is snoring loudly. Someone else is whispering a prayer, their voice barely audible under the rain. You try to focus on your breathing, to ignore the ache in your arms and the cold creeping into your socks. You think about what it might be like to retire from archery, maybe open a tavern near a river, serve warm cider to travelers, complain about politics and taxes. But even that fantasy feels like it belongs to someone with better luck and drier feet. Eventually you drift off. You're woken well before dawn by the call of the horn, sharp, urgent. Your heart jumps. Is it real combat this time? Turns out it's just an equipment check. Still, the camp is alive with nervous energy. You fumble through your belongings, ensuring everything is accounted for. Bow, arrows, greaves, jerkin. That one lucky pebble you refuse to admit is your lucky pebble. You trudge to the inspection line, yawning. The officer in charge is the kind of man who takes pleasure in making others stand perfectly still in the rain. He inspects your bow like he's judging a wedding cake. When he nods, it's a small victory. Later, during a rare break, you gather around a small fire and talk shop. One guy swears he met a Welsh archer who could split a coin with his arrow. Another says he once saw a goose wear a helmet. This somehow spirals into a debate about whether geese made good watch animals. Historians still argue whether they were actually used in medieval fortresses, but you wouldn't put it past them. You drink watered ale from a dented flask and watch the smoke rise. Then finally a moment of absurd calm. Someone starts whittling a tiny arrow from a twig, humming softly. You lean back, close your eyes and listen to the low crackle of fire and the rhythmic scrape of the knife. Not glamorous, not heroic, but it's your life, and it's starting to feel oddly normal. You wake to the sound of mud squelching. Someone's boots have sunk halfway to the underworld just outside your tent, and their curses confirm it. You roll over, the thin straw beneath you crunching like sad toast. Everything aches, and for good reason. Yesterday's training left your arms feeling like overcooked noodles. That lucky pebble under your bedrow, not feeling so lucky this morning. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a thick oat mush that seems designed to actively resist being swallowed. Still, it's warm, and anything warm earns your loyalty at this point. One archer swears he saw a weevil crawl out of his bowl. No one's surprised. He shrugs and eats it anyway. Protein's protein. The day's agenda, as posted on a damp scroll nailed to a post, includes more precision training, followed by something ominously labeled mobility practice. The scroll also smells faintly of goat. You pretend not to notice. Precision training means long, grueling hours shooting at progressively smaller targets. First it's hay bales, then gourds, then, bizarrely, a helmet balanced on a fence post. You miss the helmet, repeatedly. Your neighbor hits it once and won't shut up about it for the next hour. You consider switching quivers just to shake the bad luck. During a break, you all sit in the field with your boots off, airing out your feet like flags of surrender. One guy pulls out a bit of dried plum from his pocket like it's a precious gem. He offers a bite, and the rest of you look at him like he's the Pope. Someone asks what archers actually do when they're not fighting. A fair question, really. The truth is, your off days aren't much better than your on days. You repair gear, you chop firewood, you get into arguments about whether a chicken can be trained to fetch arrows. Spoiler alert, it cannot. You occasionally get sent into nearby villages to represent the unit, which usually means fetching supplies and absolutely not stealing apples. You try to walk tall in your patched-up jerkin, but small children still throw pebbles and call you names that probably aren't flattering. in Middle English. One memorable trip included a tavern visit where you and your mates tried to impress locals by performing an archery trick indoors. Long story short, a jug was shattered, a table lost a leg, and your name is still cursed in that village. You're oddly proud. Historians still argue whether longbowmen had formal codes of conduct or if they were just expected to behave like men of England, which seems to mean poorly, but with enthusiasm. You lean toward the latter. The closest thing to entertainment at camp is a traveling bard who visits every fortnight. He plays a harp strung with horsehair and sings ballads about knights and maidens who have remarkably poor decision-making skills. Still, it's something. You started carving notches into your bow for each week you've survived. It's not tradition, but it helps you track the days, which otherwise smear together like stew. One of the notches you gave a little flourish because you found an extra onion that day. The weather shifts again. It's always shifting. If you're not soaked, you're sunburned. If you're not sunburned, you're ankle deep in snow. You once tried wrapping your feet in wool to keep warm, but it just attracted a particularly judgmental ferret from the quartermaster's tent. As the sun dips, you polish your arrows by firelight. It's a tedious task, but oddly comforting. Something you can control. You inspect the fletching, smooth the shafts, mutter a few nonsensical words under your breath that you insist are from your grandmother. They're not. You made them up after a cider binge, but they work somehow. You talk about home sometimes, not much, just enough to remember it's still there. Some say they'll go back to farming, others dream of opening shops. You claim you'll teach archery to rich nobles for an absurd fee, knowing full well you'd get laughed out of any castle gate. The camp goes quiet. Someone's snoring again. Another hums faintly in his sleep. The sky is clear tonight. Finally. You step out, stretch, and stare up at stars that look oddly smug. You wonder what the archers of the future will be like. Probably dry, probably not sleeping on gravel. You head back to your tent, towing aside a clump of soggy socks that have achieved the texture of jerky. You settle in, pulling your blanket close, the wool scratchy but familiar. You let your hand rest on your bow, as always. It's not just a weapon anymore. It's part of your routine, your rhythm. And somehow, despite it all, you find yourself smiling. Because there's something weirdly satisfying about being a medieval archer. You just wouldn't recommend it to anyone you like. You're jolted awake by the clatter of hooves, not an ambush, not yet. Just a supply wagon arriving late, as always. The driver is yelling about missing turnips and some particularly rude pigs, but you only half listen. You're too busy digging a pebble out from under your hip. You emerge from the tent, rubbing sleep from your eyes and blinking at the dull, grey morning. The entire camp smells like onions, horses, and wood smoke, the medieval cologne of champions. You stretch, yawn so wide your jaw cracks, and shuffle toward the fire pit for something vaguely breakfast-like. Today, they've outdone themselves. Porridge with what might be cinnamon. No one's sure. You whisper a quick prayer to the food gods and dig in. After breakfast, you're summoned, along with a half-dozen other archers, for terrain simulation. Translation: stomping through the woods while the captain pretends to be a French noble you're meant to assassinate. He wears a hat with a feather so large it requires its own zip code. You suppress a laugh. Barely. The terrain is exactly what you'd expect. Cold, damp, and very committed to tripping you. You slip on a mossy log, fall flat, and gain a souvenir mud pattern across your jerkin. Your mates help you up, offering the medieval equivalent of a fist bump, a solid grunt and a nod. You're supposed to move silently. Instead, the guy in front of you steps on a twig that cracks loud enough to wake the dead. The captain sighs deeply, like someone who's emotionally married to disappointment. "If you lot were stalking me for real," he mutters, "I'd have died laughing." You try to make up for it during the archery challenge later that afternoon. This time it's moving targets, hunks of straw dragged behind galloping ponies. You miss, then miss again. Then, in a fluke of alignment and possibly divine intervention, you hit one right between its burlap eyes.
You briefly consider engraving that moment onto a plaque. While everyone's still congratulating or mocking each other, a storm rolls in with the subtlety of a drunk bard. Tents snap in the wind. A cooking pot goes flying. You manage to rescue your bow from being trampled by a panicked goat. Evening settles into a wet gloom. You huddle with your group beneath a patched tarp. Someone shares a jug of cider that tastes like vinegar, pretending to be an apple. It warms your throat anyway. The conversation turns oddly philosophical. If you weren't an archer, what would you be? I'd raise ducks, someone mumbles. I'd make boots, says another. I'd still shoot things, says a third, too quickly. You say, I'd sleep indoors. Everyone laughs. Then one of the older archers leans forward, face lit by the firelight. You know, he says, some folks think longbows are cursed. Spirits in the yew trees, trapped in the wood, make the arrows fly crooked unless you whisper to them. You chuckle, but he's serious. Swears it's true. Says his cousin's bow once refused to hit a target for weeks until it was rubbed with fox fat. Historians still argue whether longbow folklore was superstition or just a convenient excuse for poor aim. Back in your tent, you inspect your own bow, suddenly unsure. It has been acting up lately. Maybe a few whispered compliments wouldn't hurt. Lovely grain, you murmur. You sleep better that night. The next day brings target repair duty, which is somehow even worse than it sounds. You haul broken frames and patch them with hay, rope, and dreams. The targets are pockmarked and torn, silent witnesses to many near misses and glorious exaggerations. Then, laundry. Yes, even archers must face the soapy abyss. You kneel by the stream, scrubbing socks that haven't been dry since the harvest moon. The water's so cold your fingers go stiff halfway through. You nearly lose a boot to the current. It's okay. You weren't on speaking terms anyway. Somewhere upstream, two archers argue about whether Roman archers were better. One claims their techniques were flawless. The other says they wore skirts and couldn't hit a barn. Neither has read a book in months, but their confidence is unshakable. A messenger arrives near dusk, riding hard, cloaked in red, muddy from hoof to hood. He brings news of something. Maybe a skirmish, maybe a change in post, maybe just a shortage of onions. You don't catch all the details, but the mood shifts. There's a buzz. Maybe you'll march soon, maybe not. You sit alone for a moment as the camp bustles around you, watching the last light fade behind the trees. A soft wind stirs your hair, and a strange peace settles in your bones. Tomorrow might bring action, or boredom, or rain. Probably rain. For now, you tighten your laces, check your arrows, and roll your shoulders. Whatever comes, you're still standing. Grumpy, damp, slightly underfed, but still standing. Morning doesn't so much arrive as slowly leaking through the mist. You're already awake, partially because someone nearby is snoring like a wheezy bear, and partially because your toes are numb. Again. You sit up, stretch your back until it sounds like a tiny drum roll, and contemplate the joyless ritual of putting on damp boots. Today's inspection day, which means everything must look marginally less awful than usual. You spit polish your gear, arrange your arrows just so, and even wipe down your bowl with an old rag that might once have been a shirt. Presentation matters, even if no one remembers your name. The captain circles your row like a suspicious goose, squinting at laces and sniffing for reasons to yell. Miraculously, he moves past you without comment. You don't celebrate. That would be tempting fate, and fate has very specific opinions about celebrating early. After inspection comes formation practice. You all line up in staggered rows, aiming at imaginary enemies who are, frankly, better dressed than you are. You draw, loose and reload, over and over, until your fingers feel like stretched rope and your shoulders hum, with a low ache that's almost pleasant, in a masochistic way. Later, you're told to make yourself useful. This is medieval military code for "we forgot to plan this part of the day," So, you join a group tasked with sharpening stakes and setting up dummy targets. Some shaped like knights, others like very angry scarecrows. Someone adds a carrot for a nose. You nod solemnly at this bold artistic choice. Around mid-afternoon, a rumor spreads. There may be a real battle coming. Nothing confirmed, of course, just whispers passed between squires and stable hands. Still, it's enough to make everyone walk a bit straighter, check their gear a bit more often, and sharpen their arrows with extra care. You overhear two veterans debating tactics. One insists archers should fire in staggered waves. The other argues for synchronized volleys. Historians still argue whether longbow formations were tightly choreographed or more like organized chaos with occasional yelling. Judging by your current group, you lean toward the latter. Then comes one of those moments that reminds you this isn't just some muddy summer camp with pointy sticks. A young squire, barely older than a loaf of bread, accidentally loses an arrow during practice. It skims a tent post and lands a few feet from the captain's horse. Silence falls. The captain walks over. Not a word. Just stares. The squire looks ready to faint. You step forward and say it was your arrow. Why? You're not even sure. Maybe because you remember what it felt like to be terrified and alone, even in a crowd.
The captain raises an eyebrow, then mutters something about blasted amateurs and stomps off. The squire gives you a look of pure, confused gratitude. You shrug and hand him an extra glove. Later that night, as the camp settles, a low chant begins from the southern tents. It's a song in a language you don't recognize, probably Breton or Cornish or something even more obscure, but the melody is haunting and warm, like wool on the soul. You lie on your back, staring up at stars that twinkle like they're in on a joke. You think about all the other archers in history, those who stood on muddy hillsides or forest edges, who slept on straw and ate questionable porridge, who cursed their boots and whispered to their bows. You wonder if they were cold and grumpy too. You're fairly certain they were, because being a medieval archer isn't about glory or riches, it's about routine and discomfort and fleeting camaraderie stitched together with threadbare humor. It's about aiming high when everything else feels low. And it's about knowing that, despite the blisters and the rain and the endless oatmeal, you're part of something that matters, even if no one will ever write songs about your socks. A slow wind moves through the trees, you close your eyes, and now, let's gently drift down into the final hush. The sky softens above you into a gauzy twilight, the kind that tucks clouds into neat folds and smooths the world's rough edges. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of leaves swaying gently on branches. There's no battle tonight, no drills, no snoring, just stillness. You feel the chill lift from your limbs as warmth settles in, the way embers cradle a flame beneath the ashes. Your mind floats somewhere between the crunch of boots on dry leaves and the gentle tap of raindrops against canvas, weaving one slow loop of comfort after another. There's nothing left to do. No arrows to knock, no whispers to mutter to stubborn bows. Your hands rest easy now, your body swaying slightly with each breath like a sail catching wind in a calm sea. All the noise has fallen away, all the weight of training, the tension of aim, the ache of old boots. It dissolves gently, quietly. And you're just here, safe, steady. The stars blink above like slow thoughts. You let the night carry you further still. Softer now, slower now. You are no longer cold, you are no longer waiting. You are already home.
As the fire fades upon the ancient walls, that story too finds its end. Yet in the hush of fog, another waits to be told. We're stepping into the sticky, fragrant world of ancient dyes, specifically the Roman obsession with the color purple. Now, before you picture stylish togas fluttering in the breeze like a TikTok fashion reel, just know this color came from boiled snails. Yep, truly. The fancier you looked, the more you smelled like a seafood dumpster. And you probably won't survive this if you're allergic to irony, or say, imperial decrees. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough to type, Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge barefoot through the pale dust of a coastal town in the Levant, sometime around the 1st century BCE. The air is sharp with salt, and, oddly, something far more pungent. You round a corner, and there it is, a vat the size of a donkey cart, bubbling and burping, filled with what smells like every bad fish market's leftovers. A man stirs it with a long wooden pole, humming, his tunic splattered with gooey purple-black slime. You found a dye shop. Specifically, a Tyrian purple dye works. The color itself, once fixed into fabric, is glorious, deep, rich, almost shimmering. But getting it there, not glamorous. It involves thousands of murex sea snails, cracked open by hand, their tiny hypobranchial glands harvested and fermented in vats under the sun. No wonder only the rich could afford it, literally and olfactorily. Historians still argue whether the dye's discovery was a happy accident or the result of centuries of sticky experimentation. One legend says Hercules' dog bit into a snail and came away with a stained muzzle, prompting the first robe order. Whether myth or not, the Phoenicians of Tyre mastered the extraction and production early on. Their name, by the way, comes from the Greek word for purple, phoenix. The Roman elite naturally fell hard for it. Purple became synonymous with wealth, prestige, and power. It didn't fade like other colors. It practically dared time to ruin it. And as Rome absorbed more eastern territories, it also absorbed their textile tricks, like snail dyeing, and slapped a price tag on it so high, only the emperor could afford to wreak this regal. You pass a merchant displaying a bolt of cloth, its folds heavy and stiff. The dye process continues nearby. You watch as baskets of snails are cracked open with stones, plopped into the vats like some terrible soup. It takes 10,000 snails to dye a single toga. This explains two things. One, why the stuff costs more than gold per gram. And two, why nobody smelled good at elite dinner parties. Still, the finished result? It glows. It almost flickers in the right light. Roman poets raved about it. Nero reportedly wore a full purple robe just to go shopping for melons. Naturally, everyone else followed suit, until, of course, someone decided that maybe they shouldn't. Historians still argue whether the dye's value was purely economic, or if deeper spiritual meanings associated with divinity and sacrifice also played into the purple obsession. The gods were, after all, often painted or sculpted in flowing violet cloaks. Even Jupiter probably smelled faintly of mollusk, if sculpture could sweat. You edge closer to the dye works and gag slightly. The artisan smirks. "Smells like money," he says, waving a hand. It's not just snails. Sometimes they throw in other ingredients to enhance the tone. Ashes, wine, and even bits of lead. Ancient purple wasn't just expensive, it was alchemical. And like all precious things, it soon required protection. Laws, decrees, edicts. The stink of exclusivity, encoded in Roman ink. But before we get there, you squat on a rock and watch a freshly dyed tunic dry in the sun. The wind catches its hem. It really is beautiful. Regal, yes, but also eerie, like a forbidden color, a warning, a promise, and a trap if you weren't careful. The sea glistens. Snails continue their slow, slimy crawl along the rocks, blissfully unaware that their descendants will become ancient fashion victims. You breathe in, gag again, and settle back, wondering what other rules this color might hold, and who exactly decided them. You shift your weight on the warm rock as a new breeze rolls in from the sea, still tinged with the acrid ghost of snail fermentation. The tunic flutters again, and your eye catches a glint of metal, an official Roman seal sewn into the hem. This isn't just decoration, it's a license, a warning, a legal tether to imperial authority, because in Rome, wearing purple wasn't simply a matter of style, it was a question of law, power, and your unfortunate tendency to keep your head attached to your neck. The Roman Senate, and later the emperors, took purple seriously. So seriously that they created sumptuary laws, those delightful decrees that say, no, you cannot have nice things unless you're one of us. You rise and start walking toward the forum, or at least the idea of a forum in your sleepy imagination. This is where these laws came to life. Echoed through marble halls, scribbled by scribes with terrible penmanship, and enforced by men who could spot an unauthorized hemline at 50 paces. The most famous of these laws was the Lex Oppia, though it dealt more broadly with women's dress. But purple? That was in a league of its own. At one point, only the emperor could wear a full toga dyed entirely in Tyrian purple, toga picta, a garment so saturated and so illegal for everyone else that just owning one could land you in court or worse. Even high-ranking senators and consuls were only allowed narrow stripes, laticlavia, on their tunics, and the width of that stripe, also regulated. Historians still argue whether these laws were actually enforced with regularity or just symbolic flexes of imperial control. After all, Rome was huge, and bribery was practically a civic pastime. But the fear of breaking these rules, real or exaggerated, kept most people firmly in their beige tunics and humble off-whites. You pass a group of children playing in the dust, their tunics stained with food, dirt, and whatever mystery goo kids always manage to find. No purple here, not even close. One of them is tying reeds together to pretend it's a senator's sash, already dreaming of power, already aware that some colors just weren't for them. And that's the thing. Purple wasn't just a hue, it was a hierarchy, walking around like a warning label. If you were caught trying to fake your way into elite fashion, maybe by sneaking in a few extra threads of purple on your trim, or accidentally soaking your sleeves in the dye, you could be accused of maestas, treason, depending on the political mood. Which, given Rome's flair for dramatic executions and surprise banishments, was a gamble at best. There's a story, likely apocryphal, but delicious nonetheless. Another man, a senator, tried to flaunt a full purple cloak at a gladiator event. The crowd gasped. Some historians argue whether it was staged, like a PR stunt gone wrong. Either way, the next day, his estate was mysteriously handed over to the emperor, and he was never seen again. Maybe he was sent to a snail dye vat as poetic justice. You glance down at your imaginary robe. Simple wool, slightly scratchy, and very legal. No risk here, but in the wealthier districts, artisans now blend their own secret recipes to create faux purple, colors that mimic the shade just enough to impress, but not enough to offend. These include mixtures using indigo, madder root, and even rust. You wonder if this was the ancient version of knockoff designer bags. Historians still argue whether these imitations were tolerated or ridiculed by the upper crust. You walk past a dye merchant with a sly grin, offering something he calls imperial mist. Not quite purple, not quite anything. He winks. Legal-ish, he says. You decline. Barely. Laws weren't just about dye, though. They extended to other symbols of power, jewelry, embroidery,
even how many rings you could wear at once. It was a whole vibe of state-mandated humility. For everyone but the emperor, of course. The guy wore gold leaf on his sandals. Still, there were moments of rebellion. Fashion protests, if you will. In times of chaos or weak leadership, people got bold. There's one fringe tale of a town governor's wife who hosted an entire banquet in violet silks, only to have her mansion surrounded by soldiers the next day. She claimed the fabric had been sun-stained. Creative, but not convincing. You finally make it to a quiet courtyard, where statues of past emperors stand frozen in all their purple cloaked glory. You squint. Some of the paint has faded, but you can still see the deep violet dye on one statue's mantle. Just a whisper of what was. A ghost of a color that once meant life, death, or dinner invitations. You settle on a bench under an olive tree, the leaves flickering like lazy green coins. Someone walks by in a faded robe, once bright, now dull. You wonder what stories it holds. Weddings, parades, or just laundry mishaps. The laws still hover in your mind. So much effort, all to protect a shade, a snail-stained, rule-bound, status-drenched purple. It was ridiculous. It was brilliant. It was Rome. And tomorrow, maybe you'll see someone break the rules.
The sun is still high, the marble paving stones warm beneath your sandals. And now your path weaves toward the wars of Ostia, Rome's busy port city, where trade, gossip, and illicit purple flowed in like tides. The rules about who could wear the color didn't stop it from arriving in jars, sacks, and oily bundles, packed with care by merchants who knew exactly how to grease the right palms. You pass a stall that smells like ancient seawater and regret. Inside, a young man is counting dyed wool, his fingers stained with something suspiciously reddish. You raise an eyebrow. He quickly throws a cloth over it. You weren't going to report him, but now you're tempted, just for the drama. That's the thing about purple. Despite the laws, despite the imperial snobbery and legal wrangling, people still wanted it. Desperately. Enough to fake it, smuggle it, or invent new versions entirely. The Phoenician cities, especially Tyre and Sidon, were the original exporters, and they had a monopoly on the murex dye industry for centuries. Rome couldn't get enough. So what did they do? They taxed it, controlled it, declared it sacred. Basically everything you'd do if you wanted people to stop using a thing, but secretly wanted to make a lot of money from it at the same time. Very on brand. Historians still argue whether Tyrian purple's use in Roman times was more symbolic than practical, like modern haute couture, worn for show more than function. After all, the dye faded easily, turned brown in sun, and didn't handle washing well. It was, objectively, kind of terrible. But what a terrible thing to flaunt. You wander deeper into the dye district, where purple is both everywhere and nowhere. No one openly calls it that. They say things like coastal crimson or royal wine or sunset silk. It's code, and everyone knows it. Even the neighborhood cats seem more fashionable here. A merchant with an impressive mustache stops you. He offers a small piece of fabric wrapped like a sacred scroll, imported from Tyre. He whispers, 2 goats and a favor. You nod politely. A goat shortage is not something you're prepared to deal with today. Still, your thoughts drift to the source. The snails. The Murex brandaris and Murex trunculus specifically. They weren't rare, but the process of extracting their purple secretion was horrifyingly tedious. You had to break the shell just right, dig out the gland, let it ferment in sun-drenched urine, yes, that's what that smell was, and then stir it lovingly like you're making the world's worst soup. It took thousands of snails to make just a few grams of dye. Some fringe accounts say up to 12,000 for a single toga. This was not a weekend craft project. This was elite nonsense at its finest. You stroll past a small shack where a child is stirring a bucket. Don't smell it, the parent warns. Too late. It's like a fish market married a sulfur pit. You try not to gag. The child beamed.
The dye wasn't the only way to cheat the system.
Some enterprising folks tried to re-dye faded purple garments using plants like alkanet or elderberries. These fake purples fooled the eye, but not always the nose. Real Tyrian purple had a pungent, fishy scent that lingered. Sort of like aristocracy with a splash of low tide. You sit on the edge of a pier, feet dangling. A boat unloads amphorae stamped with seals. Official. Legal. No contraband here. Probably. But you notice one jar has been painted over. Someone's trying too hard to be discreet. The dye trade was lucrative, but dangerous. Entire smuggling rings formed around it. Some documents hint that even members of the Senate had secret shares in dye operations, publicly scowling at black market sellers while privately profiting from every violet stitch. One story tells of a freedman named Gaius who grew wealthy selling imitation purple to minor nobles in Gaul. He was eventually caught, dragged before the emperor, and asked to prove his innocence by drinking a vial of his own dye. He did. He died. Possibly because it wasn't even snail-based. Possibly because this story is apocryphal. Historians still argue about it. You stretch out your legs, thinking how fashion and danger have always danced closely. Purple in Rome was a color, but it was also a challenge. It said, I belong, or at least I can fake it. You overhear a conversation between two young men. One boasts that his uncle wore a purple-trimmed cloak to a dinner with the governor, and no one noticed. The other whispers that his cousin married into a family with imperial connections, and now even their chickens wear violet ribbons. You wonder how true that is. Probably not. But still, you imagine it. Chickens of class. The wind picks up. You smell salt, fish, and somewhere far away, snail stew. Maybe someone's preparing a new batch. Maybe someone just spilled an amphora. You begin walking again, your robe billowing ever so slightly, still safely unpurple, though a thread here and there is suspiciously dark. Could just be wine. Could be ambition. As the sun begins to dip, you pause before a mural faded by time and sun. It shows a banquet scene, reclining figures, golden goblets, and yes, a man in a flowing purple robe, standing just slightly apart from the others. Not because he's more handsome, just because he can. The color does that. You blink, and for a second, it's like he looks right at you. Not a challenge, not a threat, just a quiet question. What would you risk just to wear purple? You drift from the dye-stained docks and take the long way back, through the crowded forum, passing chatterers, money changers, and an elderly woman selling cursed dolls. Probably not real curses, but who knows. Eventually, your steps bring you to a quieter corner of Rome, where tailors and cloth merchants carry out the next phase of purple's delicate dance, actually wearing it without getting executed. And yes, that was a thing. You couldn't just stroll around the Palatine Hill, wrapped in a purple toga, unless you had very specific permissions. We're talking elite, the kind of person who sneezes and gets a statue built in their honor, or at least a street named after them. The toga picta, fully dyed in brilliant Tyrian purple and embroidered with golden thread, was reserved for the highest of the high, generals in triumphal processions, emperors during ceremonies, the kind of get-up that practically screamed, "You may now applaud." But even outside those top-tier garments, purple had its role in legal code. The lex oppia and other sumptuary laws, rules about who could wear what, eat what, live where, tried to rein in Rome's growing taste for flair. Historians still argue whether these laws were truly enforced or just performative nagging. like your aunt warning you not to spend money on fancy coffee while clutching a gold-plated goblet. Still, there were loopholes. Of course there were. You could get away with a purple border, clavus purpura, on your tunic if you were a senator or an equestrian. The wider the stripe, the fancier the rank. Kind of like academic robes, but with more ambition and fewer student loans. You pass a tailor's shop where two men argue over the width of a purple stripe. One insists it's exactly the legal limit. The other huffs that it's obviously oversized and an insult to all things sacred. They measure, they bicker, they pull out a scroll and somehow end up shouting about cucumbers. You walk on. What made purple so powerful wasn't just rarity, it was audacity. You weren't supposed to wear it unless you were someone. So if you did, you either were someone or you were trying very hard to become someone before anyone noticed. You pass a funeral procession. The deceased, wealthy presumably, is being carried in a finely carved litter draped in pale cloth. The mourners wear dark wool, but you notice one sash, subtly purple. Just a shade. Just enough to say, I mattered. Some fringe records mention that Romans even used purple to mark sacred animals. A prize ox before a sacrifice might be adorned with violet-dyed garlands. Not that the ox cared, but the gods might. Meanwhile, everyday folks found clever ways to flirt with the forbidden. Some mixed purple with red or blue to create off-purple hues. Mulberry, wine, eggplant, all probably invented by a desperate merchant just trying to stay out.
You pause near a marble fountain where women fill clay jugs and gossip. One whispers that her neighbor's cousin wore a purple scarf at the wedding, and now nobody talks to her. Another claims it was actually the cousin's coat that wore the scarf. The story improves by the second. Sometimes, even statues got involved in the purple game. Portraits of emperors, especially in their divine phases, were painted with purple sashes or cloaks. Some say this was a symbol of eternal rule. Others argue it was just the artists showing off. Historians still debate which statues wore what and why some paint layers suggest overpainting. Perhaps an ancient attempt at Photoshop. You walk past the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the big one. Its steps wide enough for 2 oxen and a senator's ego. Inside, the high priest's robes include a narrow band of purple. You wonder if the gods cared about dye laws. Probably not. Or maybe they invented them, just for fun. Even theater got in on the action. Tragedians often wore exaggerated purple costumes to signal nobility or godliness. Comedians? They wore cheap imitations and got smacked with fish for the audience's delight. Ancient comedy was aggressive. You pass an open-air market where someone sells purple-dyed sandals. Bold. Illegal. Probably uncomfortable. A woman tries one on and says it makes her feel like Venus herself. Her friend disagrees. She looks more like a sunburned turtle. The sandal seller sighs and pretends not to listen. You duck into a bathhouse, steam curling around you like gossip. There's a rumor floating in the water. Someone saw a merchant's wife in full purple at the Colosseum. No, not just a border. A gown. She was escorted out by the Vigiles, or so they say. Or maybe she just left early. The details change every few seconds. You lean back against the warm stone and let your mind wander. How strange that a single color could spark envy, ambition, punishment, and fashion faux pas, all in equal measure. A boy walks in carrying a basket of laundered tunics. Among the off-whites and browns, you spot one cloth with a corner dipped in deep rich indigo. Not quite purple, but close. He sees you notice, then gives a shrug that says, it fell in the wrong vat. As you leave, a poet stands reciting verses about purple, something about a queen, a storm, and an oyster. It doesn't entirely make sense, but it rhymes in Latin, and that's good enough for applause. You walk out beneath a darkening sky, the clouds tinged with just the faintest hint of violet. You wonder what laws govern the color.
You follow the fading violet of the sky into a narrow alley where oil lamps flicker lazily against sandstone walls. The cobbles are uneven and slick from some earlier spill, wine or bath water or regret, and you sidestep with practiced care. Somewhere nearby, someone sneezes with the tragic force of a mythic oracle, and no one blesses them. Welcome back to Rome. Purple isn't just for togas and ceremonial robes. You're about to get tangled in the weird, very Roman web of symbolism and superstition that this slippery color trails behind it. Because of course purple wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a statement about the gods, your family tree, and whether or not you were allowed to sit in the nice seats at the theater. It all starts with omens. The Romans loved omens. Clouds in weird shapes, birds flying left, bread burning on one side, but purple, well, purple was a divine nudge wrapped in wool. If someone unexpected showed up wearing too much of it, people whispered. If someone very expected stopped wearing it, people panicked. There's an old story about a senator whose wife wore a purple shawl to a banquet. The next day, the neighbor's dog died, a baker went bald, and 2 ships sank off the coast. Coincidence? Absolutely. But the shawl was never seen again. Historians still argue whether the Roman elite truly believed in color magic, or if they just used it as a convenient excuse to get people they didn't like thrown off cliffs. Probably a little of both. After all, if someone wears too much forbidden purple, are they breaking the law or tempting the gods? Handy logic. You pass by a temple to Juno, goddess of marriage and state power, where priestesses wear white robes with carefully hemmed purple edges, subtle but sacred. Inside, the air smells like lilies and burnt honey. One priestess adjusts her veil as you pass. Her sleeves catch the lamplight just enough to shimmer, not quite royal, but certainly blessed. You pause by a shrine. It's nothing fancy, just a little household altar tucked into a wall, with offerings of bread, figs, and a wilted lavender ribbon tied around a clay figurine. You think it's supposed to be Fortuna, goddess of luck. Or maybe it's the god of missing socks. Either way, the ribbon's color seems intentional. Hope, worn in hues. Out in the forum, merchants hawk cheap knockoffs, dyed tunics promising imperial hue, that under sunlight reveal themselves to be more mud than majesty. Still, a buyer holds one up with reverence. Maybe she has a wedding to attend, or a debt to collect, or just wants to feel more important than the sandals on her feet. Purple becomes a social game, the slightly purple sock, the possibly plum cloak, the oops, it slipped into the dye tablecloth. Everyone's pushing the limit while pretending not to. You spot one man who's clearly wearing a grape stain. And speaking of stolen, there's the matter of the emperors. Purple was their color, their personal branding. Once the empire fully embraced the idea of divine rule, the emperor's purple cloak wasn't just luxury, it was sacred. It was protection, it was a cosmic hug from Jupiter himself. There's a tale that gets told in hushed tones. An ambitious general, maybe Caracalla, maybe someone more forgettable, once donned a fully purple robe before the Senate had declared him emperor. A bold fashion choice, and a very short-lived one. Depending on who you ask, he was either stabbed, exiled, or forced to wear beige for the rest of his life. Still, purple sneaks in. You spot it in mosaics, tiny tesserae of lavender nestled into floral patterns. You see it painted into frescoes, in drapes and bed linens, as if the artists are winking at the law. You find it in graffiti scratched into marble walls. Livia wears purple at night. Gossip immortalized in stone. One theater troupe even gets shut down for costuming a low-ranking actor in a too purple tunic during a farce. Scandal.
but they argue it was satire.
The character was a donkey.
They say, a royal donkey, and somehow the Senate finds this very amusing. The donkey tunic is eventually auctioned for charity, a fringe belief found in the writings of a half-forgotten astrologer named Gaius Scribonius, claims that people born in certain moon phases are drawn to purple. He calls them Tyrian souls. They're allegedly more ambitious, more dramatic, and more prone to over-seasoning their food. His manuscript, of course, was banned. You stroll past a tailor's apprentice sitting on the curb, holding a tiny scrap of violet cloth, like it might grant her wishes. She says nothing, just watches it shimmer in the lantern light. Maybe she's planning a tunic, or maybe she just likes the color. Not everything in Rome needs a conspiracy. You find yourself near the Curia, where senators argue not just about taxes and war, but fashion. One proposal calls for the redefinition of purple under law to clarify which shades are illegal. Another proposes an amnesty for all clothing currently in borderline violation. A third senator insists they all just go shirtless and solve hunger instead. That motion is not passed. It's odd how this one color causes so much trouble. You pass a girl selling grape juice in clay mugs. It stains your fingers as you drink. She smiles and says, "Looks royal on you." You laugh. It's just juice. But still. A breeze picks up, carrying the scent of crushed thyme and charcoal. Somewhere, a fire flickers, and in its glow, a curtain shimmers the perfect shade of imperial defiance. You keep walking.
You duck into a quieter street, where shadows lie thick as molasses, and the moon paints the rooftops with a watery gleam. It's late now. Late even by Roman standards. But still the city's heartbeat murmurs beneath the stone. You can hear it in the soft stomp of sandals, the clink of amphorae being shifted, the bored grunt of a guard who's definitely too sober for this hour. Your cloak brushes against the edge of a fountain. It's shaped like a nymph, pouring water into a basin, but some prankster has wrapped her in a strip of deep purple wool. You're not sure whether it's fashion, protest, or theater, but in Rome, it's probably all three. The thing is, Rome didn't just police what you wore. It regulated how you wore it, when you wore it, and why. There were protocols. If your tunic dipped into too rich a dye, you might be mistaken for someone far more important. And that, dear listener, was a problem. You slip into a taberna, one of those cheap places with warm bread, tepid wine, and at least one too loud storyteller. Tonight's tale involves a merchant who tried to bribe a censor with a plum-colored toga and ended up cleaning aqueducts for a year. That, or he became a consul, depends on who's telling it. In the corner, a mosaic glints under torchlight, an elegant woman holding a cluster of grapes in one hand and a spindle in the other. Her robe is tinted faintly with lilac tiles, a subtle jab at tradition, or just good taste. Historians still argue whether artistic use of color was coded protest or just color. You order a bowl of lentils and perch near the wall. Overhead, someone's painted a faint line of purple along the ceiling trim. It's nearly invisible, which means it's probably expensive. And it isn't just the rich who flirt with purple, oh no. The poor too have their ways, diluted dyes, smuggled threads, or just clever lighting. There's a phrase that's passed around in whispers, wearing dusk. It means dressing in the kind of grey-blue burgundy that might, if squinted at just right, look imperially forbidden. There's a law on the books, dusty and rarely enforced, about dye smugglers. Purple made from mollusk glands, remember? That goo was more tightly controlled than the emperor's diary. Entire fortunes were made and lost, trying to transport tiny vials of it across treacherous seas. You pass one old man near the harbor once, hunched over a crate with suspiciously stained cloth. "It's beet juice," he grumbles, but his twitchy eye says otherwise. But where things really heat up is the courtroom. You remember your cousin's friend's neighbor, yes, that one, who wore a violet-trimmed sash to a wedding. He got called to court for dressing above his station.
The magistrate didn't even look at him, just asked him one question. Do you have a divine...
Still, sometimes the rules bend. On Saturnalia, for instance, things get weird. Roles reverse, servants dress like masters, and for one night, fashion laws melt like figs in honey. Even then, though, purple is played with cautiously. A flash of it here, a wink of dye there.
You can mock a senator, but don't you dare pretend to be one.
Back out in the street, the moon has shifted, spotlighting a statue of Mars in a plaza. He's been recently cleaned, but someone's painted a faint purple scar across his cheek. Symbolic rebellion? Or just a bored kid with pigment? You never know with Romans. Even the graffiti has footnotes. There's an urban legend about a brothel that operated entirely in shades of violet. Purple curtains, plum sheets, even lilac-scented oil. The twist? It catered only to officials who had voted against clothing reforms. A sort of ironic retreat from their own hypocrisy. Whether it existed or not, everyone swears they knew someone who went. You wander past a tailor's shop, its shutters half closed. Behind them, candlelight flickers. A seamstress leans over a robe, needle dancing through fabric, with the precision of a general mapping a battle. She's humming, and at the hem of the robe, just the tiniest whisper of a forbidden thread, risk stitched in silence. By now, you're well into the district where clothes are made, not just worn. The dye vats steam faintly in the night air, and the stench is, how shall we say, robust. Here's where the truth really bubbles up. Most of Rome's glorious purple dreams were carried out by laborers, elbow deep in mollusk goo. And these workers? They knew the value of every drop. One misstep, one slip in the recipe, and your dye turns from regal purple to somewhat dismal raisin. You wouldn't be executed, but you would be mocked. A fate far worse if you're Roman. A boy dashes past you, giggling, with a ribbon trailing behind him. You catch a glimpse of violet before it disappears into shadow. A prank? A game? Or maybe he's just daring the gods to notice.
There's a theory, one that gets brought up at overly academic dinner parties, that purple wasn't just about status, it was about control, regulating beauty, restricting splendor. Historians still argue whether purple laws were created to prevent social collapse or simply to make the emperor feel taller. Probably both. And so, in this city where senators debate theater costumes and laundresses whisper about hem colors, purple remains complicated. It's sacred, forbidden, flaunted, diluted, and desired. You can't escape it. Not really. It's in the fabrics, the mosaics, the gossip, even the dreams. You stretch, the night cool against your skin. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell sounds. Probably morning prayers, or a warning that someone's robe is just a bit too fabulous. Either way, you pull your own cloak tighter, drab, legal, and perfectly forgettable. You pass a cat curled on a windowsill, its fur catching the moonlight just right. For a moment, it looks regal, imperial, maybe even purple. But only for a moment.
And now the sky is lightening at the edges, bruised with the first tired glow of dawn. The streets are quieter, still damp from the mist that settled low and soft, like a well-washed tunic drying in the breeze. You walk more slowly now, your sandals sticking faintly to the stone with each step, and your cloak, still very much not purple, flutters around your ankles. You pass by a temple, not one of the famous ones, but a tucked-away spot sacred to Minerva. There's a vendor sweeping up yesterday's leaves from the steps, and just beside him, a threadbare woman arranging flowers, violets, wouldn't you know, into a chipped amphora. Purple for a goddess of wisdom. Appropriate? Maybe. Illegal? Well, Let's just say no one's tackling a flower seller today. You pause at the entrance. Statues of past priestesses line the wall, carved in white marble, each with robes that time has worn smooth. Some have had purple pigment applied over the years, some scrubbed clean again. There's one in particular with a streak of lavender paint still clinging behind her ear. A secret signature, a rebellious tribute. Historians still argue whether temple artists used purple to elevate or to agitate. Inside, you can see the altar still bears burn marks from a recent festival. Worship through fire, a Roman classic. Charred offerings, bits of fruit, smoldered cloth. It smells faintly like incense and regret. Purple played a role even here in ritual. Dyes soaked into the ceremonial cloths, draped over statues and wrapped around scrolls too sacred for common eyes. There's a rumor that one of the Sibylline books, those cryptic Roman prophecies, was bound in actual Tyrian purple leather. Lost now, of course, because if it weren't, someone would definitely be charging admission to see it. You step outside as the temple priest begins his morning chant, his robe cinched tight at the waist with a plain rope. No excess, no trim, humble by design. Still, you catch a flash of something in the sleeve, a stitching pattern that mimics waves, traditionally done in lavender thread. An aesthetic loophole, or just muscle memory from a freer age. Not far off, the forum is stirring. Officials with too many scrolls and not enough patience bustle about, robes rustling like paper in the wind. Most are appropriately dull, but a few shine with a kind of subtle defiance. A sash dyed with pomegranate and wine to give it a faint sheen. A brooch made from amethyst. A twinkle in the eye that says, "Go on, tell me this isn't legal." And really, by this point, you're starting to get it. It's not just a color, it's a conversation, a risk, a tiny velvet rebellion stitched into the hemline of empire. To wear purple was to... You lean against a column while a baker sets out his first batch of loaves. He nods to you, then to your cloak. "Could use some color," he jokes, wiping his hands on an apron stained in something that might technically pass as plum. You raise an eyebrow, and he shrugs. "Don't tell the emperor." Ah, yes. The emperor. The one person in Rome who could wear full purple without a single worry. Head to toe, imperial splendor. The tunica palmata, with its gold embroidery and eye-searing hue. Designed not to flatter but to dominate. When he walked through a crowd, people didn't just look. They blinked, squinted, looked away. It was visual thunder. But there's a catch. Of course there's a catch. Some emperors didn't like the color. Claudius thought it made him look sallow. Caligula wore it constantly and still felt insecure. Nero added jewels to distract from his singing. And Elagabalus? He wore so much purple that one senator reportedly fainted at the sight of him, probably from the fumes. There's a legend that on their deathbeds, emperors would sometimes ask to be buried in simpler cloth, undyed, humble, anonymous, not out of shame, but exhaustion. Wearing purple meant being watched. Being watched meant pretending, and pretending, day after day, is heavier than any robe. The irony. The color fades. Even the best dyed purple eventually drifts toward gray. Light, air, time. They all win in the end. That mighty Tyrian bloom becomes just another bruise on a forgotten garment, folded away in some tomb or burned on a pyre. You reach the Tiber now. It glistens in the early light, calm and steady. A fisherman casts his net from the bank, humming something off-key. His tunic is bleached with salt and sun. No dye in sight, and yet somehow he wears it like a king. You sit beside the water, stretching out your legs, letting your fingers graze the mossy stone. Somewhere downstream, a boat floats by, and you swear you catch a glimpse of a curtain, fluttering in a rich, wine-dark shade. Maybe it's just the reflection, or maybe it's someone refusing to give up the dream of royalty. Because that's the secret, isn't it? Purple wasn't just for the emperor, it was for the imagination. For the merchant dreaming of Senate votes, for the widow remembering a husband's festival robe, for the child who tied a violet ribbon around a stick and called himself Caesar. You smile to yourself. The city's hum soft now, like a lullaby. Rome might have tried to control purple, to lock it in vaults and wrap it around thrones. But colors don't obey. They leak, they whisper, they sneak through seams and shadows, finding their...
And now the journey softens. The streets of Rome, with their clatter and color and quiet rebellions, drift behind you like a tapestry slowly folding shut. The scent of baked bread, the faint crackle of a torch just extinguished, the whisper of sandals against worn stone. All of it fades into the hush of twilight memory. Your breath slows, sinking gently with the old rhythms of the city. Not the bustling imperial Rome of triumphal arches and fanfare, but the quieter one. The Rome of everyday glances, of thread pulled tight by candlelight, of laughter muffled under cloth too expensive to wear in public. A Rome where power shimmered at the edge of fabric, and people dreamed not just of glory, but of color. You are still. The weight of the laws, of the robes, of the centuries. None of it touches you here. Instead, there's only softness now. The warmth of imagined linen against your skin, the flicker of a violet hue behind your eyelids. Somewhere, far off, a lyre strums its last note, and even the river holds its breath. Let the city sleep. Let the emperors rest. Let the color purple, bright and forbidden and utterly human, settle gently in your mind like a single falling petal. You don't need to wear it. You're already wrapped in its memory.